I'm in a very old Roman street in Dashi. Dashi is in Taoyuan. Taoyuan is in Taiwan, the Republic of China. It's very hard to do videos here because every few seconds there's someone driving their scooter. People are living around these Roman ruins in the Republic of China. Like it's just a normal day. Like it's just a normal day of the week, yeah? And they are not telling people about these places on maps. I've looked at every one of 20 different maps in the hotel. In the hotel where I'm staying, I've looked at every one of 20 maps. This is the only one that at least showed me where the old streets are. There's not one old street. There are about half a dozen old streets of hundreds of old Roman buildings. How has this not been covered by anybody? This is insanity. I have some limited understanding of Byzantine, Roman architecture, Asian architecture, Tartarian architecture. I have some understanding, but only a couple of years of research. And I'm standing underneath a dome, an ancient Byzantine Roman dome that somehow someone has created. It is not a replica. It is not revival art. But everywhere I freaking go, there's someone following me around now. Talking, I don't know if they're all like just living their lives here, and as soon as they see a foreigner, maybe they're a little bit freaked out. I don't know what's going on. But I'm in Taiwan. I mean, there's like millions of hundreds of thousands of foreigners here. Anyway, this building is only the front part remains. The whole back of it is completely gone. Here's some information about it. Kensei Show Company, they say, which is one of those completely ridiculous narratives that everybody seems to believe in Taiwan, that this has any connection at all with Japanese colonialism. I mean, this building is at least 500 years old. It has individual red bricks, perfectly constructed. Then it has this ancient type of concrete, which might be Roman concrete, and then you have this archway and some kind of facade that happened in the last 200 years. But this entire building has completely disappeared. And what we're looking at here now is an ancient Roman street. And Roman archways and an amazing archways here.
Well, hello, boys and girls. It's a beautiful day here in paradise. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Oh, friends, I had to stop right in the middle of gardening and all the fun I'm having out here and do this video for you because this is blowing my mind. I've got some thoughts that I've never had before. We've been doing a lot of research into this Tartarian thing, the Knights of St. John, and all this history, Genghis Khan, Prester John, going all the way over to Japan. And this guy that we just watched says that there's some old streets in Taiwan, which is not, I think Americans, and I used to think that Taiwan was controlled by America, but it's not. It's the Republic of China that controls that area to this day, and all the military bases there are Chinese, so I don't know what they're talking about. Like we said the other day, a little bit like Cuba, and we've got a military base in Cuba, and we control Cuba, but we're always talking about the communists, right, spying on us. Well, if we control it and we've got a prison over there, Guantanamo Bay, and a base, it doesn't make any sense. But anyway, so this is Taiwan, and I've looked into it, and they claim that all these buildings that look like this were just built in 1900 or something during some colonial period of Japan or something, just before World War I. I don't know. Or after World War I, I guess. But take a look at some of these buildings and this architecture in Taiwan. That almost looks like the White House or the Vatican or something. It's certainly, as we'll find out, Renaissance architecture, Greek, Athenian, Byzantine, Roman architecture from the Renaissance era, which was supposed to have been from 1400 to maybe 1600, 1700. We're going to go through some things here and some pictures and show you that there's things that's not making sense. And we're going to find out that Hiroshima, Japan, the only building that seems to be standing after the bomb was this big, huge Renaissance, colonial style Byzantine Roman architecture building. We're going to find that it was the government buildings, the office of the government, that had all these architectural structures. But all that was left after the bomb is this architecture. And before the bomb, I couldn't for a long time find any pictures of Hiroshima before the bomb, but I did find a few. And it does appear that all of the buildings and architecture in Hiroshima, Japan, before the bomb was European style. So perhaps we're being lied to about that too. Maybe Japan was really being controlled by America to start with, and it was just a controlled opposition, and there never was any reality to this war, right? Just like the Germans supposedly lost the war, but evidently through Project Paperclip won the war. And now the UFOs that are flying all around seems to be from that nation, as though they have all this technology and just continued on ruling the world from there in a shadow government. Perhaps we already owned Japan and China before this happened, because there's a colonial period just before World War I where all the buildings look like they were built hundreds of years before in European Renaissance style. Well, let me show you a couple of these things. Take a look. Here's some pictures on the internet. There's a dome-looking structure. It looks looks very Western. It's a mixture of Japanese and Western style. There's quite a few of these buildings. That one there at the top right certainly looks a bit like, the Capitol here in America. Similar. It's similar. And then there's another one on the right. Up close picture there. Now, this is the building I was really interested in, because you see it's just bombed out. That's, I guess, like pretty much the only building left of Hiroshima after the war. And it certainly has the dome, and it's very, the architecture is just Western. Does not seem to be any Chinese architecture there at all, or Japanese. That's Hiroshima. Peace Memorial, Japan photo. So, you know how they always burn down buildings? They say they just threw them up in like 1900 or 1890, and then 2 years later they burned it down. Maybe, remember the Hiroshima nuclear bomb that was dropped? And that's what's left of it? Were they trying to get rid of some old architecture? That's interesting. And we go down here. There's the National Taiwan Museum. Here is a building. It's a painting, so it's probably depicting something quite old. It looks like there's electric lines or something going everywhere. But that's pretty Byzantinian. Debate over colonial area Japanese buildings flares. And then down there's a bunch of, Taiwanese or something, or Japanese, putting their hand on their heart, saluting, just like Americans, We all seem to just act exactly alike. Everybody just stands in line and does what they're told. Put your hand on your heart and pledge your allegiance to this flag. So this is Korea, South Korea. Debate over colonial area Japanese buildings in Korea. Many South Korean buildings constructed during Japan's colonial rule, like the old Seoul Station pictured in 1952, face an uncertain future. Seoul, Mokpo, a sleepy port city in southwestern South Jeolla province, has found itself at the center of national debate in South Korea over history and identity. Reports emerged in January that Son Hae-won, a politician from the ruling Democratic Party of Korea, made a bulk purchase of Japanese-style houses in the city. Well, we can't read that. I guess you got to pay money to read that. We could go down any of these rabbit holes. Let's take a look at some of these other buildings. I asked Google to show me the architecture style in Hiroshima, Japan. And these old pictures before the bomb hit, same picture we saw before, but here's another one. That whole area was just completely destroyed, except right in the center, the Capitol building that looks like Washington, D.C. Capitol type thing, or Athenian Renaissance style or whatever. The dome and everything, barely standing. But there are other buildings. That looks Western. Japan, Hiroshima.
Red brick Baroque-style buildings, a blend of East and West. This kind of architecture is prevalent in Dasi Old Street in the town of Dasi in Taoyuan, near Taipei. A century ago, during Japanese colonial rule of Taiwan, the street was a bustling hub for the camphor and tea trades. It was originally built as a shortcut to get to the river, where the goods would be transported to other parts of Taiwan or the world.
I've been looking for any pictures of Hiroshima before the bomb, and it's hard to find anything. But I did see these pictures. Now, that's evidently supposed to be Hiroshima before the bomb. And if you look at it, aside from the Japanese words, there certainly was a lot of electricity. There was train cars. And if you look at those buildings, all of them appear to be square with arched doors and columns, like Greek columns. There's nothing oriental about that town, at least in that picture. If you keep going down, you do see a few roofs of Japanese kind of style, but the cities and the buildings don't look Japanese. It's hard to say, but certainly a lot of the buildings were not, they don't look oriental. Maybe they look like the old Renaissance buildings, I don't know. But there aren't many buildings, like some of these are after the war, after they rebuilt the city, but like that one there, that's certainly Renaissance. It's colonial style, whatever. Right there. Here's one in Hiroshima, Japan, on an ordinary day, I guess. And it seems rather clear that the buildings there don't look Japanese. They look European style, arched windows, straight Greek columns. This is Hiroshima, evidently before the war. Just looks Western. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Now, that's a painting, but that's evidently about all we've got. And that looks like downtown Hiroshima, evidently. And all the buildings downtown, again, do not look Japanese. Yeah. So I asked Mr. AI what this Roman Byzantine architecture is in China or Taiwan. And they were happy to oblige. And they said that while neither Roman nor Byzantine architecture are native to China or Taiwan, there are instances where Western architectural styles, including classical elements, have been incorporated into buildings in Taiwan, particularly during the Japanese colonial period and later periods influenced by Western architectural trends. That must be what this guy was talking about when he was standing there in front of this Roman Byzantine architecture with these arches, and he says it's not Japanese colonialism. Well, did the Japanese inspire colonial architecture that looked like Roman architecture and start making this all over Taiwan? And if they did they also do it in Japan? And if they didn't do it in Japan, because it was a colonial, during Japanese colonial period, influenced by Western architecture, why did they only do it in Taiwan and not Japan? We'll see if they did any of it in Japan. But they say, here's a breakdown. Neoclassicism. During the Japanese colonial period, there was an interest in westernization, leading to the adoption of some classical architectural elements in buildings. This often involved incorporating features like Greek columns, Roman arches, and domes into the design of some buildings. Examples, including buildings like the Presidential Office Building, which incorporates Ionic and Corinthian pillars. The Presidential Office? Where's that at? However, these adaptations were not necessarily exact replicas of Roman or Byzantine styles, but rather a local interpretation of classical forms. Postmodernism. The revival styles. In latter periods, particularly with the rise of the postmodernism, there has been a renewed interest in historical and traditional architectural styles, including Western classical forms. This has led to the incorporation of elements reminiscent of classical architecture in some modern buildings, sometimes as a nod to Western influence. Well, but we're not talking about modern, so I don't know why they're telling us this, unless it's to influence us and make us believe that, oh, no, this is normal. They're still doing it in modern times. But that's not what we asked. We asked about why these buildings in Taiwan were like Greek columns. So the Presidential Office Building features iconic and Corinthian pillars, which are classical Greek and Roman architectural elements. Some museums and public buildings may incorporate neoclassical features, arches or domes, showing a Western influence. Some churches built during periods of Western influence might incorporate architectural styles reminiscent of those found in Europe, which could include some Byzantine or Romanesque inspired features, though these are less likely to be true Byzantine designs. It's not true Byzantine. It's a little different. Okay. It's crucial to distinguish between the Roman Byzantine architecture and the adoption or adaptation of classical elements within Taiwanese architecture. You won't find buildings in Taiwan that are purely examples of Roman or Byzantine architecture, in the same way you would find in Europe or parts of the Middle East. The styles present are usually a result of Western influence and interpretation, often combined with local Taiwanese architectural traditions. So the whole thing that you find on AI is not to just tell you yes or no or yeah, whatever, but it's a whole long dissertation trying to convince you that no, don't worry, Tartarian ideas are wrong. This is not what you think. Don't get confused there, son. Now, this isn't what your eyes are telling you. You see, you're not an expert. You don't really know what you're looking at. Do you notice that? The whole thing, it's like I didn't even ask them. All I asked AI was, are there buildings over there that have Byzantine Roman architecture? And they go into this long spiel about, yeah, but, don't you get worried there, son. There's no such thing as Tartaria. That's silly. Why, these buildings are just interpretations. And, you know, maybe they are some kind of an interpretation of Byzantine Roman architecture, but they're not really like you would find in Europe. They just look like it. Okay. So what is this? And why what is it? The presidential office building? Why that particular building looks like Corinthian pillars? Perhaps the government that was ruling over Taiwan at some point was Byzantine Roman culture or something? Who were these people? Could it have been John the Prestor that went over there with Genghis Khan that were from Europe and conquered it? And what was the age that it was built? Let's take a little look. Okay, the presidential office building in Taipei, Taiwan, incorporates classical architectural elements, including Greek-style pillars, particularly Ionic and Corinthian columns. All right. Yeah, I mean, that does look a bit European. There certainly is some interesting architecture. It doesn't look Chinese, but it is not a dome per se, or I should say your typical dome like on the Vatican, but yeah, there is a dome at the top. It's just a longer chimney with the dome on the top. It says that the construction began in 1912. The main structure was completed in 1915, marked by a beam raising ceremony. Okay, so they built this whole thing in 3 years. It's a little bit like what we find in Chalago, where they built the whole city of Athens and Rome together. This huge, magnificent architectural structure of this city just for the fair, and then they burned it all down. Boston, Philadelphia, parts of New York, St. Louis, San Francisco, all around the world in the United States. So the entire building was finished in 1919 at a cost of 2.8 million Japanese yen. The building was initially designed to house the office of the Governor General of Taiwan during the Japanese colonial period. It sustained substantial damage during Allied bombings in World War II. After repairs, it became the presidential office in 1950 after the government of the Republic of China relocated to Taiwan. Wow. So, the government of China, the Republic of China, relocated their government headquarters to this building that looks European, a Byzantine Roman or something. Is that when... why did they do that? Were they being influenced by the West? Okay, yeah. Is that when we took over, was it 1915, after the war, the New Deal? We took over the world, and Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan, one by one, we took over all these places, Korea and Vietnam, Seoul, all these different places. While incorporating classical features like the Ionic and the Corinthian pillars, the overall architectural style is described as Renaissance Baroque. It also features a red brick facade with white accents, a distinctive element of the building. Take note of that very carefully. A red brick facade with white accents. That's a feature that was so important they decided to mention it. Well, this is how we get AI in a lie, and we see that they're covering something up, because in just a minute here, I'm going to ask them something specific about that, and they're going to deny it, even though they just said it. So keep that in mind. Red brick. The building's central tower was the tallest structure in the Taipei Basin during the Japanese colonial era. They always have the highest building, the most important. Like here in New York, the Empire State Building was the tallest building for a long time, and it was owned by the richest people in the world, or at least in the United States, and then ended up being purchased by Donald Trump, who always has got to have this big tower in the middle of every city, claiming that he's the man on top of the heap. So that's interesting. So let's find out if this building was built or just founded in 1915 or 19, whatever it was. So I asked, can you provide a link to pictures of the construction? And AI says, unfortunately, finding readily available links to pictures specifically showing the construction of the presidential office building in Taiwan can be challenging. Historical construction photos are not always digitized or widely available online. Here's why. The age of the building. The building was constructed over a century ago, 1912 to 1919. So photographic documentation might not have been as extensive or well preserved. Historical context. Taiwan was under Japanese colonial rule at the time of the construction. Historical records, including photos, may be located in Japanese archives or libraries. Availability, even if the photos exist, they might not have been digitized or made publicly accessible. Where you might look, Taiwanese archives and libraries. It gives you all these places you can go look, but they're not going to look for you because they don't know anything. Why they can't get access to all these crazy things? Maybe you can. Aren't you AI? Are you supposed to know everything, but you don't know anything convenient to your own narrative, is what it is. Museums, they tell you where you could go look, but they ain't going to go look for you. That'd just be too hard. Tips for searching. Well, why are you giving me tips for searching? Why don't you just search and show us? And they write, images specifically depicting the construction of the presidential office building in Taipei are not readily available. So why am I going to go searching if it's not available? And you already know that. Such photos may be in archives or historical collections that are not easily accessible online. However, information and image related to the building's history and current appearances are available. Well, if they're available, let us see. But they can't do that. That's something that they just can't do. That's hard. All right, let me ask another question. So I asked, are there Roman, Greek, or Byzantine-like architecture in Japan during the colonial period? They write, while not a dominant style, some instances of Roman, Greek, or Byzantine-inspired architecture can be found in Japan, particularly the Meiji and Tasso periods, late 19th and early 20th centuries, and in some of its former colonies, like Taiwan, I guess. Westernization, modernization, and all of this. Example, the Osaka Prefectural Nagoshima Library architectural design. Yeah, that looks pretty Greek, don't it? Roman, Byzantine, whatever whatever architecture that is. It looks Greek. It's like Washington, D.C., Why'd they do that? In Washington. There's a dome on it, too. Wow. Very seriously Athenian, don't you think? But they show this one too. There's some of the architecture. It looked pretty Japanese, though. Oh, there you go. Tokyo National Museum. The Hokakikikiki wing of the Tokyo National Museum. Hmm. Well, it would be reasonable to think that if they brought this architecture over there, it would have to incorporate some of their original architecture. They had said that the particular architecture in Taiwan and Japan in the colonial period that they started building in Taiwan and Japan and their other colonies was the Renaissance Baroque architecture. And I thought, well, when was that? Because that I don't think if it's some sort of colonial trend in Japan and Taiwan, China, why would they be patterning it after a Renaissance period? If it's a modernization or a westernization, wouldn't they be making patterns after modern Western culture? Why would they be going back to the Renaissance? So I said, when is this Renaissance Baroque architecture and where was it prevalent? They said, Renaissance Baroque architecture isn't a single distinct style, but rather a term used to describe a transition or overlap between the Renaissance and the Baroque periods. The Renaissance architecture, 1400 to 1600. See, why would they pick that particular period of time, 1400 to 1600, and start building buildings after this particular architecture from Italy in 1400? If it's a Western modernization of the colonial period, why? I mean, they called it the colonial period. Why did they decide to go colonial? And why did they pick the Renaissance architecture or the Baroque sort of overlap between 1400 and 1600? Why? Perhaps those buildings were created in 1400 or 1600. You know, like it doesn't make sense that people in one period of time back in the ancient Renaissance period that nobody even cares about would pop up in the 19th, early 20th century, and the people in Japan and China and all over that eastern, seaboard over there would just start building architecture. Like, was their government geared toward Renaissance government style? Did they want to go back to that culture? Did they study on it in school back in the Japanese classrooms? Or were they more mesmerized with America, which is not colonial? It doesn't make sense. The time period, primarily 15th and 16th centuries. The prevalence was emerged in Italy, particularly in Florence. Now, by the way, Florence was an area in Italy that was prevalent Judean peoples. There were what you call the ghetto. Remember the song "In the Ghetto"? Elvis Presley. Did you know that Elvis Presley was Jewish? They all were. I mean, I guarantee it. But perhaps he was singing about something that was dear to him, because in the city of Florence, there were ghettos. And those ghettos is where they lived. So, particularly Florence, and spread throughout Europe, characteristics based on classical Roman and Greek architectural principles, emphasizing symmetry, proportion, and order. The Baroque architecture is 16 to 1750. It's primarily the 17th and 18th century. Prevalence originated in Italy, particularly Rome, spread throughout Europe and to colonial regions. Characteristics emphasize dramatic effects, grandeur, and movement, often incorporating elaborate ornamentation and complex spatial arrangements. Well, you might say, okay, well, that's why they did it, because it's so beautiful, spatial and elaborate, ornamentation. Okay, but there's lots of different periods with ornamentation. That's a particular ornamentation, a particular elaboration and spatial arrangement. Why did they choose that particular age? Because it doesn't seem to be any particular age that is known for anything other than the Renaissance, which started in Italy, in Florence, where all the Jewish people were, because they were really trying to get this idea of let's get away from the Catholic Church and start this push towards some kind of liberty. And we'd have to go into another whole video on whether it's the kind of liberty that we would have justice for all, and that sort of liberty that came from France, or if it was just a liberality that might be prevalent today with pornography and rebellion and whatnot, if you know what I mean. Remember, we talked about our founding fathers that in the 1700s seemed to be enamored with Monticello and Montpellier, calling their original government French names like burgesses based on the liberties and the fraternities of France. And this kind of architecture, I remember, had domes and Greek pillars, but also had a lot of red bricks, which is exactly what this is. If you notice, it talks about red bricks. And so I think it's pretty interesting, and I want to get to the bottom of this. Then finally I asked AI, are there pictures or photos of any of this Renaissance Baroque style architecture being built or constructed in Japan or China during the Japanese colonial period? Now, mind you, they had cameras, 1915, 1912. And they said searching for images of Renaissance Baroque style architecture being built or constructed in Japan or China during the Japanese colonial period yields limited results. Yeah, pretty limited. In other words, nothing. Whew. Hybrid architectural styles. During the Japanese colonial period, Western architectural styles were often adapted and combined with local Japanese or East Asian elements. But no, not Western, but Renaissance Baroque. Why that particular style? Resulting in hybrid or eclectic styles rather than pure Renaissance Baroque buildings. Okay, but if the government buildings were being built this way, the presidential offices of Taiwan, perhaps this is an indication that people from the West had gone over there and taken over Japan and Taiwan and these areas. That China's never the Republic of China. Why would China name themselves a republic? That's what people from the Plato's Republic, the Athenian Greek style architecture would be. But now we got China as a republic, following communism, which is what, Jewish? Karl Marx? And yet we claim that China is an independent country? And yet they've got all of the same gadgets, and I'm using a Samsung phone, and we got Sony televisions, and we've got Toyotas, and the biggest car, and the most reliable vehicle. The most reliable vehicles in America are probably Subarus, and Nissan, and Toyota. All these different Yamaha, things, Yamaha guitar, one of the most widely played guitars in America. Everything, the cameras, Nagataki, all these different Eastern computers, Oracle, the company, all comes from there, and somehow or another, it's absolutely not connected to Western money and control. So, the limited construction of grand structures, limited meaning nothing. While the Japanese colonial authorities undertook construction projects, they focused more on the infrastructure, administrating buildings and facilities related to colonial governance rather than grand structure in a pure Renaissance Baroque style. Who cares? Get to the point. What are you trying to tell me here, Mr. AI? I asked a very simple question. By now, I think they know what I'm up to, what I'm asking, and so they're just poo-pooing and trying to, like putting a carrot on a stick, lead me away from the water because they don't want me to get to this water. Focus on existing styles. In many cases, the colonial authorities adopted existing local styles or adapted Western styles to suit the climate. But why would they be adapting it? Why, obviously, you don't just go in and just change everything in their culture. But somebody came in there with colonial styles. And why? What's the bottom line here? And why the Renaissance? Maybe it's because it was actually built in the Renaissance. So photos of specific buildings, historical photos, might be found if you know the specific names of the building from the Japanese colonial period that incorporated Renaissance Baroque elements. Well, I already gave them a name, and they showed me pictures, and I asked them if he could give me a picture of when it was constructed, and they couldn't do it. So we're just batting zero. Then they give you tips to search. Again, I didn't want to search. That's a lot of work. I ain't going through all these museums and archives, and that's why I asked AI that's supposed to know everything, has got access, to everything in the universe that's been archived. And they can't find any pictures of any of that being constructed. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
And again, floral design here. And you can see that here in Kinman, which means that this is Roman symbolism, the acanthos, the sign of life, also associated with a military legionnaire crescent. Then we have the oval. Here we have the oval pattern. So there you have the Roman acanthos, and there you have the same symbol in Kinmen, Republic of China. Acanthos, identical design. Now you will also see the acanthos pattern again. If I show you another part of this, there we have the decor.
Here's a little thing on Facebook. This image was caught from a Turkish Orthodox community on Instagram. Turk Orthodox highlights the historical influence of Byzantine architecture on Islamic architecture. Here's a simplified explanation. Byzantine architecture, seen in structures like the Hagia Sophia, built in 537 AD, was influenced by the earlier Roman architecture, which itself drew from Hellenistic Greek designs. The Romans used arches, vaults, and domes extensively, as seen in the buildings like the Pantheon. When the Byzantine Empire emerged, it innovated upon these Roman techniques, creating large domed churches with intricate mosaics and focus on light and vertical space. The Hagia Sophia is a prime example of this architectural style. By the way, this big place there, Constantinople, whatever, and this Hagia Sophia in 537, about the time that the Islamic religion started. As we've talked about many times before, there certainly were existing scriptures, and these people throughout the Middle East were Christians. That's why they believed in Jesus. The cults of today of Islam, the Sufis and the Sunnis and all the others that I don't remember offhand. There's several of these groups, just like the Protestants and the Catholics. It's different Christian religions. Well, there's different Islamic religions. They were created by the Catholic or the Roman Byzantine government. And it's just variations. They're armies, basically. They're political things. It has nothing to do with spirituality. All you Sunnis and Muslims that are involved in some cult or religion, it's just like Christianity that are Protestant religions. That's not Christianity. That's somebody's version. That's somebody's political control. Doctrines and armies and going to war. The Knights of St. John were not about war. They were about defending the people of Mary Magdalene, the children, and the Holy Grail and the treasures and the holy and sacred things. They were defending the sacred things. They weren't trying to colonize. But somebody was, and was going through Persia and all the way to China, making political movements and buildings and architecture and propaganda and religions to get people there in control. Why do you think in countries where there's Buddhist or Confucian or Zoroastrian, or whatever country you go to, they get these big cathedrals, and they all very much similar of Roman Byzantine architecture, and they all got monks, and they all got people sitting around beating their head up against the wall, lighting candles, mantras and all. It's all religion, and it all stems from Satan, friends. It has nothing to do with Jesus Christ or Muhammad or Buddha or any of these others. These are religions. And this architectural style was created, and the modern Islamic religions, the modern Christian religions are all created by Satan. If you belong to a Protestant religion, you need to get out of her, my people, if you do not want to share with her in her sins or partake of her plagues. If you are involved in an Islamic religion or an Eastern Buddhist religion, going to some shrine, beating your head up against the wall, sitting in a cross-legged position like an idiot, sniffing lilies, you're not going to attain anything but a crick in your back and arthritis. And it's sacrilegious to do these things and to sit and waste your life in a monastery trying to beat yourselves and pummel your body to get to heaven. The Apostle Paul says that the harsh treatment of the body and all these rituals and ceremonies do not get you anywhere with the Lord. Only a pure heart and love for your fellow man, which might mean get out of that monastery, get you some jeans on, grow some food for your neighbor, teach them how to fish. I've got somebody to, this whole last week that a brother, a Christian, but is so deluded. He hates the Constitution of the United States. He said, when he was in trouble, the Constitution didn't do him no good. And I'm like, okay, so you're going to get rid of liberty and justice because the people who were supposed to uphold liberty and justice didn't do so? How can you fault the Constitution? There's nothing in the Constitution that's bad. It's only the perversion of the Constitution that is bad. There's nothing in Christianity that is bad. It's only the perversion of Christianity. There's nothing in any ancient scripture that is bad, or ancient prophetic writing anywhere around the world that is bad. It's misaligned. It's misrepresented. They got people running around saying that Buddhism is just sitting in a corner going, yoga. That has nothing. There's no mention of this practice of yoga in the Bhagavad Gita or the Vedas or any other books, or the Upanishads or the Zoroastrian or the Confucius religion or Taoism or Shintoism or any of these places. You can't find this modern ridiculousness in any of it. And by the way, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you are not a Christian. You're not following Jesus or his appointed apostles. You have gone astray. You are apostate. you are fulfilling the scripture of the unfaithful steward who goes and says, my master is delaying his coming. Oh, it didn't happen in 1914 or 1864. So then he goes out and starts beating his fellow servants and eating and drinking with the confirmed drunkards, meaning drunk on the blasphemy of the law and the vengeance and the hate. And you refuse and you reject the truth or the love of the truth, either way, both, that you might have the deliverance or salvation from the wrath which is coming. Because you have put yourself back under the law, because you condemn your fellow brethren. Yes, the apostles and the elders, which were 72, a Sanhedrin, did take matters into consideration, as James, Peter, John, Paul did. And there were things that they would pronounce. They said, you're not under law. We're not the lawgivers. We're not your judge either. Nobody's your judge. They gave us freedom. But there were matters that the Sanhedrin judged and could judge because they had the Holy Spirit and they were sent by Christ. An individual who declares, oh, I'm an elder, just appoint yourself, right? Some organization come from some guy named Russell. You decide to make a governing body, which comes, that word and term comes from Masons, and your leader was a Mason, and your halls, that word comes from Masonry, and it's an apostate version of it. You're in deep apostasy. You shun your own family members and your children, your brethren. What kind of a person would want to go and, like the dog to its vomit, back to that? A religion that killed your own mother. That's right. And separated you from your brethren. And crippled one of your brethren. And separated your brethren from their wives and children. And the gall of a religion where a man would disown his own son after he grew a beard, and they disfellowship him for that, and then you get blamed for that, and your mother, who died in pitiful, deplorable pain, because everybody in this world has lost the grace and the health, knowledge, and the back to Eden principles of living right and eating right and loving one another in joy and happiness in a brotherhood where there is only one leader, which is Jesus Christ. What are you, a follower of Paul? You follow Peter? Apollos? You idiots. We follow Jesus Christ and him alone. And the Constitution only is us, we the people, saying, yes, we're going to continue to follow this liberty and this grace that the Apostle Paul and the other apostles withstood these evil, backslidden Judaizers right straight to their face, that the freedom of Christ may remain with you. And now you want to go back and start condemning your brethren. Jesus said, if you don't forgive others, then you will not be forgiven. You better think twice, Jehovah's Witnesses. And you Mormons, your founder, Brigham Young, murdered the prophet Joseph Smith. Was a polygamist, a pedophile, and now you're involved in the government, which is not the government of Christ. And you're doing all these secret things underground under Salt Lake City. And some of you Mormons don't even know about any of this stuff. And you've heard of other things, and your church won't even allow you to investigate any of this stuff. And you won't even keep the words of Joseph Smith and the word of wisdom. And by the way, it doesn't say anything about not drinking coffee in the word of wisdom. It says that we should eat meat only in times of winter or in famine, and that we should eat herbs and vegetables and be healthy, and we shouldn't smoke put smoke into our lugs and things like that. But it doesn't mention coffee or tea once, or Coca-Cola. So you guys are as apostate as an apostate can be, and you need to repent. I'm telling you, Jesus is coming soon. And all you other Protestants, we ain't got time to explain all of your problems with your cults. But it should be very plain there in 1 Corinthians, where the Apostle Paul said we shouldn't follow after one little clique or cult or make up our own doctrines. You know, in the latter days, they shall teach doctrines of devils and all kinds of, oh, he's in the inner chamber. It's 1914. He's parousia. Come out to meet him. It's blasphemy and it's ridiculous. Anyway, it's very sad to see all of you following after whatever whim or wind of doctrine that suits you, you know, that'll tickle your ears. It's actually disgusting. But Islam spread. It was encouraged to do so. And they somehow admired Byzantine buildings, adopted many Byzantine architectural features, such as domes, arches in their mosques. The influence is evident in early Islamic architecture like the Great Mosque of Damascus, and continued with the Ottomans, who converted the Hagia Sophia into a mosque in 1453. The Ottomans further integrated these elements into their own mosque design, such as the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. Thus, the similarities between Orthodox churches and mosques arise from this historical architectural evolution, where Byzantine designs rooted in Roman and Hellenistic traditions influence Islamic architecture. So there is the Orthodox churches, look-alike mosques. There is in 537 on the left the Orthodox church, older than Islam, and on the right you've got a mosque converted and inspired by a church in 1453. They just put a cross on top, basically. And notice that all of these have the baptismal font and monuments or obelisks and domes. The dome is the bin, just like in Washington, and then Washington Monument is an obelisk. This goes back to Egypt and Athens, where Athens got it from the Egyptians. Pythagoras and Aristotle and Plato got this from the priesthood by going to the Egyptian priests. And Roman architecture, beliefs, and religion, Greek, and every other religion or architecture or politics came from Plato, which came from Pythagoras, which came from Solon, which came from Egypt, and spread all around the world. And all this architecture goes back to that. How about the Al-Aqsa Mosque Dome of the Rock, or Cordoba Mosque? Yeah, where did this Dome of the Rock come from? It's supposed to be sacred to Islam, but it was probably built by the Romans. I know. And you're like, no, the Crusades, the Europeans went over there and tried to conquer those people. No, the Crusades was fought by Templars to protect people on their holy pilgrimages. And the Templars were not Catholic, friends. They were from Mary's line. They were protecting the holy things until they were infiltrated by the Illuminati and went to London and built the government system of the world, this huge buildings and castles and cathedrals that these Templars, this big temple, it's called Temple Square, and the church, that is where the Bar Association gets their authority. And you see the judges in the black robes everywhere in the world, and you see the priests with their black robes, the judges of the court. Why we call it a court is the court of the temple. And this goes back to the Judean priesthood, which is why all of the modern bigwig lawyers are people who have names such as Auskis and Bergs and Levi and Cohen and all of this. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem is regarded as one of the first notable examples of Islamic architecture, and it has a massive Byzantine influence from these mosaics to the dome. The Byzantine Empire didn't really emerge. It was the continuation of the Roman Empire, and the people and enemies of that empire only ever identified as Roman. Christianity and Islam are both products. In the heights of both of these religions, there are in control, making it look like they are not in control, but they are. Anyway, wow. Well, that was an hour well spent, I think. And I think we're getting further and further towards the truth, and we're gonna figure some of this stuff out here pretty darn soon. Anyway, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and go get this uploaded. The Lord will bless you. Seek Him while you can. His grace and His peace will be with you. He loves you all, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.